In today's video, I'm going to be doing an unboxing and review of the Electro & Co. EC4P LITE, a brushless motor intended for use in modified razor chassis. If you've seen my last video, you'll know that I was quite a big fan of the Electro & Co. EC4P V2, but like a lot of things on this bike, I did end up breaking it. Now, I do not believe that the failure of my EC4P V2 was any fault of Electro & Co. You'll see in just a few minutes why I say that. I did do some things a little bit sketchy on my installation, but this is the Electro & Co. EC4P LITE, and I believed it'd be a pretty good replacement for my EC4P V2 since I already had my VSC 75350 programmed to work with the EC4P V2. Now, unboxing the EC4P LITE, you'll see that it's very similar to the V2. It does come in the silver finish instead of black, which I honestly wish it was black, but it's not a big deal. The first major improvement I noticed out of the box is that it does have a larger and more robust output shaft and a totally different style of sprocket bore. This is going to be a lot stronger and a lot more well suited for these high power razor builds than the old style of D bore. This does mean that if you're in a position where you're upgrading it, you will also need to replace your sprocket, but they do include a 9-tooth sprocket fitted to this bore. Now, the other major improvement that we were not able to see is that there's a stainless steel rotor sleeve on the internal of the motor that's going to help it with high RPM durability. Other than that, this motor is pretty much exactly the same as the EC4P V2. It features a KTY83 temperature sensor. It has native fan mounts and it mounts to the razor in the exact same way. Now, they introduced this motor to their lineup underneath the One motor, which is a significantly more powerful motor, but for most people, this motor is going to cut it unless you're pushing over 12 to 14 kilowatts. Now, I'm going to remove my EC4P V2 so that we can examine what exactly caused it to fail. I rode on this motor for quite a few months, and then eventually I did start to hear this strange grinding sound on one ride. I tried to ride it home, but it did end up partially locking up, and somehow it even managed to break the output shaft off of the motor. Now, some of you did notice in my last video that my motor sprocket was actually welded on, and this was an unfortunate rookie mistake on my end. I didn't realize that these were reverse threaded, and I did use an impact on it, which stripped it out. I didn't want to buy a new motor at the time, so I just had my buddy weld the sprocket on. Now, what I believe happened is this caused it to be slightly off center, and it kind of just caused a bunch of vibrations within the motor that slowly wore things away and caused this failure. Needless to say, that's not a mistake I'm going to be making again. Installing the EC4P LITE is pretty simple. I'm going to be using 3 M6 by 16mm bolts with flat washers, as well as a little bit of blue Loctite. I'm going to hand thread each of these in and then go back and tighten them down once the motor sits straight. Once everything's tightened up, I'll go ahead and zip tie my motor cable out of the way of the wheel and lead it towards my VESC. In my case, I already have eyelets installed on the phase wires of my VESC, so I'll simply just bolt the eyelets together between the motor phase wires and the VESC phase wires, and then I'll slide a piece of heavy walled heat shrink over, which will seal down on there and release a ton of glue that's going to hold everything tight and keep it protected from vibration. Lastly, I'll connect the hall sensor and check over my chain tension. Now, I did take a little bit of a gamble and just turned my VESC on without doing any relearns or calibrations for the new motor. I figured it should be pretty much exactly the same as the EC4P, and I was correct. Everything seems to spin up good, so I'm going to go ahead and take it on a test ride. Alright, we've got the EC4P LITE installed on the bike, and surprisingly, I did not have to do any tuning changes between the EC4P V2 and the EC4P LITE. Other than the new motor, the setup on the bike is exactly the same as the last time I rode it. It does seem to be pretty smooth from what I've ridden so far, but I'm going to do a short little test ride to get some impressions. Nothing too crazy because it's pretty much the exact same setup as it was before. We do have a 9-tooth gear instead of a 10-tooth, so we're going to lose a little bit of our top end, get a little bit more torque, and other than that, I did also install some motorcycle style levers and some pit bike brake calipers just to give this thing a little bit more stopping force. So my immediate first impression is that the entire setup feels a lot smoother. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's the new motor or if it's just the fact that my front sprocket isn't welded on like it was on my last setup. I probably showed it earlier in the video, but I didn't realize that I had reverse threads on there and I ended up stripping it out with an impact. Pretty big rookie mistake, but I didn't want to scrap that whole motor, so I just welded it on. It did work for the time being, but at the time I thought the bike was smooth, but I'm noticing now on this setup that it's just a lot smoother. The power delivery, it feels like there's a lot less vibrations in the bike. Honestly, a lot more enjoyable to ride. I am still running the exact same tune and power setup. So we have a 72 volt battery with about 200 amps peak of line current. This equates to 14 kilowatts peak on a fully charged battery, but in the real world, you're seeing about 10 to 12 kilowatts, which I do believe the EC4P Lite is rated for a peak of 14 kilowatts, so we're pushing it just right about to its limits. Really smooth power delivery though. I'm definitely a fan of that. With the lower tooth sprocket, it wheelies a lot easier. I've kind of lost a lot of my wheelie confidence after a couple pretty bad loops. I do think I need to do a little bit of throttle tuning to get this thing just to feel a little bit more smooth and linear. But now, one thing I am gonna do is I'm gonna take this to the local track tomorrow and see if I can get any of the regular guys out there to take it on a little run around the track. Give me their opinions on it as a track bike. Obviously, this is kind of a toy, but I have seen some people do mini supermoto racing on the electric Razor chassis, so I wanna get their opinions and sort of see what's up. And even with that gearing change, I do still think we're hitting about 50 miles an hour, which is, you know, really good, especially with all that low and mid-end responsiveness that we have on this motor. Other than that though, it's super similar to the EC4P V2. So if you broke your EC4P V2, or if you're looking for a motor to get started with, I do think this is a pretty good option. I also do know that Electro & Co says that they don't recommend using this motor with a non-noisy cricket or true moto controller. Now, I'm having perfectly good luck running it on VSC. I have no issues. I do think that obviously they say that because they want to sell their own stuff, and that's all they can really say that it's approved for. But if you're using a far driver or a VSC, you should have plenty of good luck on this motor. The only thing I wouldn't do is use one of those non-programmable sine wave controllers that are kind of just like generic e-bike controllers. I don't think you'd have necessarily good luck with that. That's really about it though. There's not a ton to say about this thing. I do think that the reinforced shaft and the change from the D-bore sprocket to this sort of more robust sprocket mounting or shaft type is definitely a good move on their part. I think a lot of people had problems with sort of some more intense load stuff ending up stripping out that D-bore on the sprocket. So I'm definitely a pretty big fan of the shaft design and sprocket design that they've chosen on this thing. But other than that, yeah, if you're in the market for a Razor motor, I would say that this is a very good option. It will get the job done, and we'll put it through a little bit more demanding testing at the track tomorrow, so we're gonna see how that goes. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with it. Alright, it's the next day, and as you can see, I have the bike loaded up in my truck bed. Now, I ended up getting a pretty cool opportunity from one of my buddies to take this bike out to Gulf Coast Karting here in Houston, Texas, to hopefully get some impressions from some track regulars on what they think of a tiny bike like this on a mini supermoto race course. I met one of the more experienced track regulars, Michael. I introduced myself, and he said he was willing to go take it on a couple rips around and tell me what he thought. Here's some of his impressions from his helmet cam.
This thing is little bitty tiny. It really wants to go. You give it just a little throttle, it's not very progressive. It just wants to launch. The bike feels like its roll axis is under my butt. It's not like it's like chest level. It almost feels like it pivots from the lower wheels. Whew. This thing's got torque on the low end. It runs out really quick on the top. It's got a lot of torque down very low. The suspension is not doing a really great job controlling it. It only takes a few corners and nothing on the brakes. It accelerates really quickly. Okay. Interesting experiment, but oh goodness.
I'll start off my conclusion by saying that this bike was never intended for any sort of track use. I really just built it to ride it around my neighborhood and have fun. But when one of my friends got into supermoto racing, I kind of had the question of if this thing would be something suitable for that. Now you can tell by Michael's opinions that there are definitely some big shortcomings on this bike, but as far as the power plant goes, the EC4P LITE and my custom made battery, this thing is more than capable to run on track. In both myself and Michael's testing, we pushed the motor pretty hard and didn't have any overheating issues, and it ran smoothly the entire time, so I'm definitely happy with Electro & Co.'s motor. I do kind of want to experiment with some more modifications to make this bike a little bit more suitable, probably some 12-inch supermoto wheels and some Kenda curved tires, but I do think there's a limit to how much you can do with this small Razor chassis that's ultimately just a toy at the end of the day. Now, this may well be the final version of this bike, as I'm definitely looking to get into something a little bit more serious. Let me know in the comments what bike you think I should build next. Personally, I really want to build a 96 volt Sur-Ron Ultra B, but we'll see if that's possible. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, drop a like if you can, and I'll catch y'all next time.